This week we watched Thunderbolts with an asterisk, aka the new Avengers.
I do think it is a good exploration in loss, grief, and depression. I like the use of them taking these characters and then using that to tell a separate story. Like, for all purposes, this movie is really Yelena's story, aka the
Mhm.
Black Widow 2, that we see following through from the end of the Hawkeye series, where she's still, dealing with the loss of, Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow from Avengers Endgame and the subsequent grief and like that. And the use of, I guess, the Sentry, who is a fairly newly created hero. If I remember correctly, he debuted in the in 2000s, if I remember correctly. So he's a fairly new character in as far as Marvel comics are concerned, along with Miles Morales, who is the Black Spider-Man. And to use his duality as his powers of the Void and the Sentry, the Sentry being a good guy, the Void being almost a supervillain in a way, and using that to explore, depression and grief, and then analyzing that through the lens of, having abusive parents, and then his issues with drug addiction, finding hope and light, and finding, this movie being an analogy for creating a found family, much like the first Avengers movie was, where they kind of became a family, still not as close, but they realized even though we're all strong, we still kind of still need each other in a way. This movie kind of mimics that, but instead of waiting two movies or basically through the whole end of the series to actually them operate as a family, the friction and the camaraderie, we get that from the jump in just one movie instead of having to wait 3 or 4 movies to see that element come to fruition, which I think is a good step up in preparation for Fantastic Four, which was advertised as Marvel's first family, an actual family. So you see the depiction of them showcasing family dynamics improve with these subsequent teams, So yeah.
When I left the theater watching this, I definitely felt like we had like regained some of the things that we were missing from these later phases. The post Avengers Infinity Wars situation. Like it felt like we're like grounded a bit, like we're back to like what made these movies good in the first place, which is just like people working together and like trying to like help each other out and help other people.
Yeah.
Like I think we kind of went off course with like the multiverse stuff, and I really like specifically that they focused on Florence's character of Yelena. I thought that that was really cool. One, because like I didn't really think much of her when I watched Black Widow, the movie. But what a lot of people have been saying, which I also agree with, is that she is a much more compelling person to watch on screen in this
Mhm.
character than Miss Scarlett Johansson. Like, no
Yeah.
offense to the girly. I think she was really good once we got to the end of her saga. Like, once we're in like the Infinity stuff, Infinity Wars and Endgame, I thought she was great in that. But in terms of like the early Iron Man stuff and whatever, like, I did not pay that much attention to her, to be honest. She wasn't like giving me really anything. Scarlett Johansson is an interesting actress. Like she and like Natalie Portman, like those are actresses who like they'll give you a good performance if they want to, but if they don't want to, like
Yeah.
they're just not going to. So
Yeah.
it's very like it's difficult, but I really enjoy the fact that like they made me care about characters who I really didn't care about
Mhm.
initially. Like I really loved Elena, and I Bucky wasn't really like doing too much in this, but like the little bit that he did, I did enjoy that. I thought Sebastian Stan, one, he's a great actor, and the fact that he chooses to keep doing these movies
Mhm.
just shows me that he at least cares about it. So like I'm here for that. I didn't even know John Walker was. Is that his name?
Yeah. They was the Captain America they got in Falcon and Winter Soldier. Yeah.
Knew nothing about that guy,
Mhm.
but I still thought Wyatt Russell did a good job.
Mhm.
And Red Guardian, David Harbour, I found his character like a little bit annoying, honestly, in the Black Widow movies. And I thought he was really good here. I love the dynamic that him and Florence have. Like, I like when they do this kind of like ramshackle team. Like, let's just get like random people together and make it work and see like how these guys work together. It's very like Guardians of the Galaxy in that way. And I enjoy that's to me one of Marvel's like bright spots is the Guardians of the Galaxy stuff. So like I really enjoyed that. And I loved that they were talking about like mental health, depression, grief, like finding your purpose and identity. That was a huge one that I feel like through the exploration of the mental health, we got to that where it's just like, no, like you actually have like a reason to be here. Like you have these skills, and unfortunately, you were and talking about Elena specifically, like she was taken as a child and became like a child assassin. The stuff that they do to the women in the red room is awful, and she has these skills, and she doesn't really. She's like numb to everything because of what she's gone through.
Yeah.
But to be able to repurpose that and rework it to a way where it's like, no, actually, I can have a positive effect on what's going on in the world and not just be like passive about it. I thought was great. And they did the same thing sort of with Sentry too, where it's like, no, you like there's something there where you can actually be beneficial. Like you don't have to, go down the road where he was going, where it did seem like after Valentina, he was supposed to be like another villain, but I didn't even really buy the villain part. I was just
Yeah.
like, nah, this is just a person who was struggling.
Yeah.
And I feel like they did a good job, and especially Lewis Pullman. I think Lewis and Florence were my favorite parts of the movie.
Mm.
But I definitely feel like Lewis, his performance as Bob, before we get to see the other side of him, I thought he did a really good job at just like seeming like a person who is like in crisis, trying to figure things out, doesn't really understand like what powers he has, like how that's affecting people. Like he's just trying to like help. And so by the time that we got to this entry part, I wasn't even like, oh, he's a bad guy. I was just like, well, okay, let's figure out where this is coming from.
Mm.
Like let's give him a chance.
And I like the fact that Sebastian Stan is there. And he's also a character who we saw that kind of study, a study in grief and study in loss in his appearances. Particularly, like I said, you didn't watch Falcon and Winter Soldier, I did. And this a lot. There were multiple scenes of him with a therapist talking about how to deal with what he's been through. He tries to mimic the same thing. We saw, um Chris Evans in his portrayal of Captain America having a notebook, of things to do. And initially he's like, oh, if I write these, I killed this person. I killed this person, I remember. So if I help them, that should, solve the grief or whatever issues I'm dealing with. And I like how he mentions that he basically says I've been where you are. And I
Mm,
like that he's kind of like the like a guiding figure, like you see, especially at the end, where I guess we've seen Yelena take on almost a leadership role, even though Wyatt and Red Guardian both think they're the leader. In a
mhm,
way, it's more so actually her and Bucky, and Bucky's telling her, "Oh, do this, this," as she's kind of struggling and stumbling. Using him as saying like, as a mentor, like I've been through what you've been through. Let me help you get out of that. And I love that. We have John Walker. Once again as being a good guy, but not being a good guy. That facade, that armor of, oh, I'm Captain America, I'm the soldier, I've done all this, but my prior actions of killing an innocent, you know, my loss of my friend drove me on a dangerous path, and then I took that anger out on my wife and my kids, that kind of thing. So he puts on the armor of like, oh, I'm a good person front facing, but deep down he's still guarding and dealing with stuff. I mean, the only character we really didn't dig into was Ghost, the
yeah.
girl who shifts you stuff, and that's more or less due to how she was portrayed in Ant-Man and the Wasp.
Mm,
Honestly, so it's not really her fault. I wish we could have spent more time with her understanding and still trying to process that experience of not being seeing her father die in front of her face in front of an explosion, and those years of not being able to touch or interact with people because she's kind of intangible. In
mm,
a way, I wish we got to see her deal with that. Like those are connections that she's lost from a lot of people. Um, and I like the fact that he kind of decided to kill Taskmaster like in the first like 10 minutes, because I think they understood that uh they kind of did fuck up with the Black Widow movie. They did give us Elena, did give us Red Guardian, but that movie should have been done so much further. And that Taskmaster I view very much like the um the first version of Deadpool that we got in Wolverine Origins. Like it was a bad take on that
Mhm.
character. So hopefully down the line with this multiversal stuff, that there's still glimpses in it because of the end credit scene. Hopefully that they course correct and actually get an accurate version of Taskmaster showing up later on down the road.
I wasn't like a huge fan of Julia Louis-Dreyfus, only because it just kind of felt like she was doing her character from Veep. Like she was
Mhm.
just like, so I'm gonna do the same thing here. And it's like, okay, well, cool. Listen, it was funny. Like I think Julia is great in that role as Selena Meyer. And I think that it in the context of this character and what's happening, it kind of does make sense that she would be doing like a version of that in this. I don't like how they tried to like give her some backstory about like why she is the way she is. They kind of threw that in there, and I was like, I still don't care.
Yeah, yeah,
You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
So I was just like, all right, whatever. And I think the turn of like, I think her trying to get Bob to like do what she wanted, like her whole plan didn't really make any sense. She was just kind of winging it. So don't know about that, but other than that, I did really like it.
Like when Marvel does stuff like this, that's when they're at their peak. Like this being a study in uh, grief and loss and anxiety and all that stuff. Of course, you have the original Captain America movies, which are almost like spy thrillers. Like when they like adapt and like tell a story within a story, almost kind of way. That's when Marvel is at their strength. When they started pumping out movies to pump out movies, they kind of lost that you know storytelling element. Had to see their backtrack. I think this movie and its reshoots and rewrites were better pulled off than I think Captain America, Brave New
Mm,
World.
mhm.
It's Brave New World seemed like it was really rushed to get to figure out how we're gonna like thread this path. At least, and I think these are both going on at the same time, but because the Marvel has a habit of announcing their release dates super early, like you can really tell, visual wise, that they rush through Captain America Brave New World. This one they took their time because I think they were also using a lot more physical effects. They purposely said we're gonna reset this thing, make everything physical, and so they really grounded it and took their time to rework it.
I guess because it wasn't like necessarily primarily a vehicle to set up other movies,
Hmm.
it actually worked well as a movie. And I and maybe like it's so sad that it took Marvel all this time to figure that piece out.
Yeah.
But yeah, this movie is good because it was a concise story about these people. Like we have the setup stuff for Fantastic Four, but like it's fine because like I think I said this last week. That's a movie that's coming out.
Hmm.
Like we've seen the trailers. It's already been shot. It's coming out in July.
Yeah.
Like it's not like they did the whole thing at the Comic-Con where they like listed a bunch of new projects and it's like, okay, well, this has to link up with that. Or I remember there's just in other Marvel movies where they'll have post-credit scenes. Especially I remember one in the Multiverse of Madness with the Doctor Strange where Charlize Theron just popped up out of nowhere and they just
They don't
popped
pay off
in
for it. Yeah.
that post-credit scene and I was like, okay, what does this mean? Like I don't even know who you are. Like this is so confusing and weird. So I'm grateful that they're learning their lessons.
They were all like trying to get all of them coming out summer blockbusters. So you like seeing 2 to 3 summer movies almost every like quarter, which is like, come on, that's a really ridiculous cycle. But yeah, it seems like they course correct. I think with this movie they kind of did figure out what to do and not to do. It's a good course recovery from Marvel. I really enjoyed myself with this movie. So, yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Did you like that clip? Well, you can listen to the entire podcast because the 16mm Film Crew podcast is available on all major podcast platforms.